Greetings and welcome all. This is the Legacy Guard, and we're returning today to discuss why we hated Star Wars Episode VII, The Last Jedi.
It was
To begin,
actually episode 8.
was it actually Episode 8? It
Yeah,
was Episode 8.
you're so distraught over over the movie. Your numbers are getting off a little bit.
It's unfortunate. It was actually Episode 8, The Last Jedi. Now, to properly discuss this in its entirety, we have brought in once again Porglord. We have Taurus Crimson and myself, Draco Argentum. We'll begin with the Disney acquisition of Star Wars from Lucasfilm, the $4 billion deal with the devil that has brought Star Wars to the state it is today. Gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and welcome. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Draco. To speak a little bit on the Disney acquisition, um, you know, Kathleen Kennedy was brought in a few months before the acquisition, and I'm not really clear if Lucas actually brought her on to run the business for him, or if the Disney deal was already in talks, and they were like, "Hey, if we're going to buy this, we want somebody to head it up. So find someone." I'm not sure. I didn't know a lot about Kathleen Kennedy at the time, but I trusted, if George trusts her, then I trust her. That was kind of how I went into this thing, and then we'll talk about the rest later. What about you, Porg?
Kind of the same deal. I mean, I thought Kathleen Kennedy had been there for a while. Um, I was, I guess, a little bit excited and nervous at the same time about the whole acquisition. Disney does, put out a lot of good movies. They also put out a lot of questionable movies sometimes. But given how Marvel had kind of taken off and was doing, I was, kind of excited because, we were going to get more Star Wars movies.
One thing that Disney was definitely sure to bring to the project was a lot more money. And everyone kind of thought that additional money being infused with Star Wars couldn't go wrong. That the more money you had, the more money movies you could make. And up to that point, there wasn't really a bad Star Wars movie. Everyone thought that the worst you could go was the inclusion of a Jar Jar Binks or two, and what could go wrong from there. Kathleen Kennedy had been involved on the Back to the Future movies. She'd been involved in the Indiana Jones movies. I had thought mistakenly that she had been with Lucasfilm for a really long time, and so I was always of the opinion that if George has brought this person in and has decided that this person is worthy of the keys to the kingdom, I trust George Lucas's decision in this manner.
Yeah, I think a lot of people thought she had been there longer than she had been. I certainly thought that as well. And then Porg and I looked it up a few months ago, and she had only been there a few months. So, but I was under the same assumption. I thought she had been there a long time.
And so Star Wars takes as it becomes a Disney property, and immediately following that, we have the first of the new movies. Well, first thing we had was the declaration from Disney that all of the extended universe was no longer going to be considered canon.
Yeah, that was right off the bat. Which, as I've stated before, I wasn't a huge. Well, I didn't read any of the EU, so it didn't really affect me. But I had a lot of friends that were devastated. One of my friends had almost every single EU book, has an entire office dedicated to essentially EU bookshelves. And I mean, as you can imagine, and I know Porg, what were your thoughts when they announced that?
Well, as I stated before, I mean, it's been probably the one thing that's angered me the most about the entire acquisition was them going back and saying the EU was no longer canon. Because again, I didn't have necessarily everything, but I had the vast majority of the books, and had an investment in a lot of the characters that were introduced in the EU.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as soon as they said that, I mean, it really put me on edge as far as what the movies were going to be like. As time passed and excitement and built up for the Force Awakens, it kind of tempered me a little bit, and I was excited to see what they were going to do, how they were going to rewrite everything.
Now, somebody coming from a position where I wasn't invested in these EU characters, I I agreed with their decision to do it because it gave them the freedom to tell the stories they wanted to tell. However, I assumed that they were going to use the EU as a template and bring in some of those characters and tell some of those stories. And I feel like they've really dropped the ball on that piece of it. What about you, Draco?
I'd agree. When I heard that they were getting rid of the EU as as canon, I understood that their decision was based purely on a business standpoint. They did not want to be forced to follow the EU. They did not want to be painted into a corner. They didn't want to go play in someone else's playground or someone else's sandbox. They now own George Lucas's sandbox, and they wanted to define what that was. Um, I wasn't exactly comfortable with all of that being written off completely. And when they said they wanted a completely original take on the story, I did feel some hesitation, some trepidation, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's move on to the Force Awakens. So this movie comes out, does two billion plus. I mean, everybody and their dog goes to see this movie. It relied heavily on nostalgia. It was essentially a almost a reboot in a way that it was completely derived from Episode IV. A lot of fans were furious and felt like A New Hope was just redone with different characters. Um, I was I felt the same way, but I didn't hate the movie because I was excited about where it was going. I was excited about Rey's arc. I wanted to know more about her background. I wanted to see what this stormtrooper, the stormtrooper who has defected. We've never seen that. Where are you going to take this character? Who is Snoke? I mean, essentially, the Empire is defeated and the Sith Lord is taken down, and now you have this essentially a new Emperor in place. Where does he come from? I want to know his story. So all of these things that the Force Awakens set up left me in a very excited place. I was more excited about Star Wars after the Force Awakens than I had ever been. Where were you at after the Force Awakens, Porg?
I kind of fell into the camp that was disappointed in the movie because it was just basically a rehash of New Hope. I didn't necessarily not like the movie, but I mean, it definitely left me with a lot of trepidation on where Disney was going to be going with their stories. How much of a rehash are we going to get of what we already know? I figured if they were going to go in a new direction, it would have been something that was completely different. And it just kind of felt like they weren't really doing that. I hadn't necessarily given up on the franchise. I mean, I understand that, they want to, kind of put their own stamp on it, but, you still want to have that familiar kind of feeling and setting with it. So, I kind of gave them a pass on that one. It's like, okay, well, it's your first Star Wars movie. Yeah, let's see what happens with the second one before we make a more permanent decision.
Yeah, Draco.
I also gave them a bit of a pass. I understand that a lot of the draw for the Force Awakens was the nostalgia power. There were a lot of fans who have been fans for 30 years since the original trilogy came out who were clamoring to find out what happened after The Last Jedi. They had read the books, they had an idea, and now Disney says we have a new idea and we want to bring it to you. So everyone's excited to see what it is, what it looks like on screen. So no matter what, the Force Awakens was going to be a hit because everyone wants to go see it, and ultimately it had to channel a lot of A New Hope because Disney had to establish what Star Wars is, what that felt like for a new generation. If you think about it, every single one of the trilogies has started on a desert planet at some point. You've got Tatooine in both the A New Hope and the Phantom Menace. That's the home of origin for both Luke Skywalker and for Anakin Skywalker. So it makes a certain amount of sense that they'll decide. Well, obviously we have to, our new hero has to come from a desert planet because heroes who are sensitive and mystical can only come from a desert world. Um, They
Yeah, and
made,
go ahead.
well, they made a lot of decisions with the Force Awakens. Of course, they introduced a new dark side character. They introduced the Knights of Ren, which appear to be like a new Sith Order, except I would assume that there's more than two, because Kylo Ren was a master of the Knights of Ren, and Snoke makes reference to the Knights of Ren. You find out that there are still political differences going on. Even in the First Order, you have Kylo Ren and General Hux. Kylo Ren is suggesting, well, maybe we should go back to clones, and Hux is defending his normal human soldiers as well trained and efficient. But um, there's still a lot of things going on that reference back to the Clone Wars, that reference back to the original trilogy. But you had to extend your trust a little bit further. You have Rey from this desert planet. Sure, she's been crawling around the insides of derelict Imperial Star Destroyers for years, but you don't know exactly, was she daydreaming training her Jedi powers? How she became so apt with her abilities so quickly with so little training. I understand that there's the potential for genius. There's a potential for raw talent, but a lot of this was very convenient. But as it was the first Star Wars movie, we were willing to give a pass, and I, for instance, was willing to make an investment of my fandom in this because I wanted to see where it went. I expected a payoff. I wanted to find out who was Snoke. I wanted to know who were Rey's parents. Were they special, or was Rey herself a confluence of the Force? What explanation could be brought about to fill in these little gaps that could make sense of everything, because we've been spoiled up to that point with the original trilogy, and then with the prequels, which are adding this additional information in to enhance and enliven the lore at the time.
Yeah, and I was going to agree with you earlier about the feel. Let's call it the lived-in galaxy is the term I've heard before. So the OT had this lived-in galaxy. The prequel trilogy did not. So I think Disney was going for that. They wanted to get that nostalgic feel again, and that's part of another reason why I gave them a pass. I know what you guys are doing. You're trying to get the bad taste of the prequels out of people's mouths. The prequels were not supposed to have that lived in galaxy feel. It was a different time. The Republic was in power. It was a different time. It was a different era, and it was meant to be. But Disney wanted to go back for that OT feel, that nostalgia feel, and I think they accomplished that as far as the aesthetic. It was a little too heavily derived from A New Hope, but that's where we were at the end of Episode VII. So now, after 2 years of theorizing, of the excitement, we finally go see The Last Jedi. So I want to get everybody's take on when during the movie did you think this is not what I expected? Porg?
Um, I mean, you pretty much almost get it right off the bat. I mean, that's that whole scene with Poe and Hux, their little dialogue there. I mean, it's just I'm immediately just shaking my head in disbelief on what's going on. I mean, it's it puts me on edge for the rest of the entire movie. Um, just how well am I going to be able to? How seriously am I going to be able to take this movie? Um, it just kind it just kind of gives you you get that bad first bite, and I think it just flavors the rest of the meal and the movie.
Yeah, I agree. The dialogue between Hux and Poe right off the bat, that joke did not land for me. That holding for General Hux bit, I thought was not the kind of humor that Star Wars has ever had. And from that moment on, like you said, I was on edge. And then shortly thereafter, when Luke throws the lightsaber over his shoulder, I was essentially done from that point. What about you, Draco?
Well, I would agree with you guys. That first exchange between Poe Dameron and Hux was odd. And it wasn't odd from Poe's perspective because in The Force Awakens, when Poe is captured and brought before Kylo Ren, he's like, "So how are we going to do this? You talk first, I talk first." He's making light of it at that point. He's a prankster, he's a jokester. He likes to dig the hole deeper before he tries to dig out. But this is the first sign that we have that suddenly General Hux has changed from being the competent military leader he was in The Force Awakens to becoming just as to take it from Snoke, a rabid cur in a position of power. Um, you find out that he's just holding on, he's just biding his time. He's delaying this Poe Dameron so that his ship can power up and he can get past the defenses of the dreadnought, and then with a single shot of his blaster start destroying the armored defense turrets on board the dreadnought. When I saw the interaction between Hux and Poe Dameron, I thought this doesn't sound right. But as soon as he zips forward and suddenly he's overpowered, blowing these turrets up with a single shot, I, that at that point I realized something had gone wrong. Since when have our X-wings become that powerful? I mean, you could destroy in the original series or even in the prequel series an embankment like that if you rain your ship into it, maybe. But they're armored. They're meant to take that kind of impact.
Well, that whole first space battle sequence, I got the sense that whoever wrote this doesn't get Star Wars, like just doesn't get it. And then you have those bombers come in, these super slow bombers. The bombs are dropping. There's gravity in space. I mean, from that point, whatever excuse they've come out with in the visual dictionaries or whatever, that stuff, the extraneous material, ignore that. If you can't explain it in the movie, then you haven't done a good job as a writer. And those bombers, the gravity, that whole sequence there, what you said about how powerful these X-wings are now, that whole sequence just did not work.
Well, if you notice, the X-wing is super powerful until they send out the TIE fighters, and suddenly he can't avoid them like he was in The Force Awakens. Suddenly he's Poe Dameron normal pilot. He's not Poe Dameron hotshot pilot knocking 6 TIE fighters out of the air within of 5 seconds.
No, and I also really quick, Porg mentioned this to me a few weeks ago. Nobody in the film says I've got a bad feeling about this, and Porg had mentioned that BB-8 says it in that first sequence, and then Poe Dameron says "Happy beeps, buddy, happy beeps." I don't think that counts. Even if BB-8 did say it and that's what he said, I don't feel like that counts. That's another thing that I think Rian Johnson got wrong. Porg, what was your take on that opening space battle?
Um, I, I was shaking my head again. I didn't necessarily have a problem with Poe jumping out and destroying the gun embankments, because you kind of sort of see that in some of the past video games. I mean, you would fly your ship around and try and blow up gun emplacements on the ships. But the whole bomber thing, it did bother me. It's, they've tried to come back and say, well, we were trying to give it like that World War II feeling, and I'm just like, no. I mean, it's just, you're flying your ships way too close. They wouldn't do that in an actual air battle like that. And it's like, oh, well, freak accident, manages to take out half our bombers. Like, why are you flying that close? There's no reason why you should have your ships clustered like that, especially in a space battle. I mean, you don't do that in an atmospheric battle, let alone.
Well, in World War II, when they had limited fighter escort, they did have to fly them in close formation in order to be able to defend them.
They flew in the box to overlap your firing lanes for your gunners. Yes, but if for the most part, if one was hit, it didn't take out 4 or 5 other bombers. You would only lose the one. So I mean, I just that as an excuse just doesn't fly for me. I didn't necessarily have any problems with the way dropping the bombs or whatever. I can understand. The excuses that came out with that, I can understand. I don't know. It just did not feel very Star Warsy to me, I mean, I was glad that, we had a new ship out there. We'd been seeing a lot of X-Wings, and, they bring back a few of the A-Wings in that battle. And you do get to see, with the new bombers, you do get to, you get a new ship. So that was exciting. Because, I definitely think that if they would have tried to use like an A-Wing or a Y-Wing or a B-Wing for the bomber role in that, I think that would have been very hard to believe given the size of the ship. Unless, of course, you manage to fly it into the bridge and take out everybody. But and it may have just been, like I said, I had already kind of had a bad taste in my mouth from the way that started out, that I was, I questioned some of that, but I still just even have rewatching it. It just kind of aggravates me. And the sheer fact too, that, your bomb release mechanism is a remote control that, can just go wherever it needs to be in the ship.
Even if that was a secondary release device, it was still very convenient.
Mm-hmm. So,
well, if you think about it, in Rogue One, you had Y-Wings that were firing ion torpedoes. They were able to instantly disable a Imperial Star Destroyer. The whole thing.
I think they hit it with a couple. So, I mean, you don't necessarily get a size. I think there's a size differential, obviously, too, between a Dreadnought and an Imp-2 or an Imp-1 type destroyer. I definitely think they could have done that better. I mean, I definitely feel like, I don't necessarily have any problems with the battle itself. It's just the way that whole kind of sequence went down that just, like I said, it just didn't make any sense to me. Not only as kind of like Star Wars, but just even in practical, almost a real world kind of situation.
I will say, though, that the Dreadnought Commander was the best role in that movie. I actually really enjoyed that character. Of course, unfortunately, he gets blown up shortly thereafter, but that was something I took away that was positive from that sequence.
He did seem a little bit indignant that there were no TIE fighters scrambled to defend the Dreadnought, which seems to be a little bit of a military blunder. So we have the new bombers that are coming in, which in interviews around The Last Jedi, Rian Johnson had said openly that he was a big fan of the World War II footage of the bombers, and the bombers in question that he was so fond of were the Flying Fortresses. And they had cockpit gunners, just like these Star Wars bombers, which were called the MG-100 Star Fortress instead of Flying Fortress. But they were flying in close proximity. I would agree with Porglord that it doesn't make sense for them to be flying in close proximity, especially if they're going to arm all the bombs while they're still inside the hold. Now, if you arm the bombs after they fall out of the ship, that solves that problem. In regards to the gravity issue, you mentioned Taurus. I've seen an explanation that if all these bombs are stacked on these racks, then the artificial gravity that exists within the ship would be enough to force them out the bottom of the ship, which again, that does make a certain amount of sense. However, when the ship kind of sinks down into the Dreadnought afterwards due to quote-unquote space gravity, I have an issue with that. And space gravity is a flaw that affects many ships in this movie. They did have, if you recall, at the end of the battle, after they see that the entire force of Cobalt Squadron has been destroyed, there are a few A-Wings and X-Wings that managed to survive, but the majority of this squadron has been demolished. Now, two things to keep in mind. At the beginning of this battle, once the Dreadnought fires on the base, no one else is getting off the base. The last of the ships is off the ground and heading towards the cruisers, and Leia gives the order, we're going to retreat. We need to retreat right now. So if the First Order commanders had expected that they would just be retreating and then it would just be running them off, then they probably would have not expected a space skirmish, especially with a overpowered Dreadnought there who should be firing on the cruisers instead of waiting for little X-Wings to blow it up. So you could argue that that they were justified in not having a very large TIE presence, but they should have had some TIE presence. The bombers flying in close formation, that was to ensure that the limited number of A-Wings and X-Wings could defend them, though being as there weren't much in the way of TIE fighters, it's just confusing. Question for you guys. Do you think that these Star Fortresses had their own hyperdrives, or were they supposed to somehow fit inside the major cruiser?
I have no idea.
I would have to assume that they have their own hyperdrive. I mean, you wouldn't think that something that size would be able to fit inside any of the inside the Mon Cal. And also given the fact that even something as small as an X-Wing or an A-Wing has a hyperdrive, I don't see why they wouldn't have one inside these ships, which would beg the question, you know, where I guess that's I assume they do, because you don't really see them in the opening sequence when they show the Resistance fleet, at least that I noticed. So I assume that they had some sort of hyperdrive so that when Poe calls them in, they basically hyperdrive in and begin their attack run.
So do we want to move on to Octo?
Well, sure. Well, to conclude the battle, the majority of the fleet is destroyed. The remaining fighters get on board the lead capital ship, the Radis, for the fleet, for the Resistance, and they manage to hyperdrive out. Immediately after the battle, we have a scene where Finn wakes up because he was injured due to a lightsaber slash from Kylo Ren, a non-fatal lightsaber slash, and he is found walking through the hallways by Poe, leaking fluids from whatever Bacta suit he'd been wearing. And upon asking how he is, as we have Poe says, "You must have a million questions," and Finn says, "Where's Rey?" And thus we go to Octo. Taurus, would you like to lead us off?
Well, like I said earlier, you know, you've been waiting 2 years to see how this sequence plays out with Rey holding out the lightsaber. Of course, this lightsaber is Anakin's lightsaber. It has a ton of history. Luke grabs this thing, throws it over his shoulder, and to me, that represented. I don't know if this was intentional or not, but that it represented Disney. Luke was Disney, and the lightsaber was the franchise, and that's what it felt like for me. It felt like Disney was throwing that franchise right over their shoulder, didn't give a damn what the fans thought. I mean, I've heard interviews where Mark Hamill says, what about the fans? What about what the fans want?" Ryan Johnson says, "No, this isn't. We're not going to do what the fans want." He's such a selfish prick to make this film exactly how he wanted to make it, and didn't care about what anyone else wanted. And this whole scene where Luke throws the lightsaber over his shoulder, and then you see his X-wing in the water later on, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, you know, in Empire he couldn't get the X-wing out of the swamp in Dagobah. Yoda had to do it for him. Now he's this Jedi Master. Are we going to get to see Luke not only raise his X-wing out of the water, but raise it up, you know, to the cliffs? I thought that was a wasted opportunity. And then the whole thing with the map gets dropped for me. He obviously tells Rey, "I came to this unfindable place so I can die." Well, who the hell left the map? What was the whole bit in the first movie? The essential plot was finding the map to Luke Skywalker. Can anybody tell me what the map even meant?
Well, this plays back into a lot of the postulating and theorizing we did ahead of time. There was a running theory amongst our group that only he who could figure out where Luke was would be worthy to go and get him. Only after, you know, tracking him down were you to be proven worthy of his tutelage, or maybe even that the world had to prove itself to be worthy of him coming back, that they had to prove that he was wanted or needed, because a hero on his own can't force a civilization to save itself. He can't save it from itself.
Yeah, absolutely. But that was theorizing, and of course that was another one. Another YouTuber calls it gotcha moments. Gotcha. This subverted your expectations. Porg, what's your theory on the map?
I think it's just a way for them, at least from The Force Awakens, it's a way to tie back to New Hope, because again, you have this droid that has this essential piece of information that everybody wants. Everybody's after the droid to get this piece of information. So, but in this instance, instead of it being a schematic for the super weapon, because we already all know how to blow up this super weapon, we need something else for everyone to chase after. So it's the map to Luke. So it's a way for them to harken back to A New Hope, but still have, kind of that, give it their own little, twist. So, it's new, or it's the same, but different kind of thing.
And I get that, but who left the map?
I think at a certain point, like Luke's travels are known to the public, but then at some point, he kind of disappears off the map, and apparently only R2 kind of has, the other piece of that information. Which again, I don't understand how R2 knew where Luke was at if he's not with Luke. Or if he flew with Luke to Attu, how did he get off the planet? How did he leave? Obviously, since Luke's X-Wing is in the water.
And isn't it established that you have to have an R2 series or some kind of astromech droid to do the calculations to jump to hyperspace?
That's always been what we've been told. Now, so if they've changed it in the new EU, it's never been pointed out that I know of, unless it's in a visual guide somewhere that got buried.
Well, he could have a junky R4 down in the X-Wing in the water. You don't see it.
Yeah, but no, absolutely. I mean, he could definitely have one with him that we don't know.
Or he could have had another droid do the calculations beforehand and just put it on some kind of disk and put it into the ship manually.
Yeah, he had it on thumb drive on his keychain.
Well, no, it was in his actual thumb.
Oh yeah.
Tasty. I like that. That's funny.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think we've solved that piece. Draco, what about the map? What are your thoughts?
The map. So R2 had, I want to say 90% of the map, but he didn't have the last part. Well, there were a lot of worlds inside that last part. So if the Resistance wanted to, I guess they could try to mount a search of every single planet and every single system that was in that section of the galaxy, or they could try to find it independently. The theory that had been floating around in our circle at the time was that Luke had been in search of the first Jedi temple, and that he was trying to find some hidden knowledge there, or because of in the aftermath of his failure at his school, where Kylo Ren went rogue and killed a large part of his students and subverted the rest to the dark side. Seduced rather, that he would find some kind of wisdom there that would explain where he went wrong, or gain some further enlightenment in the Force, and that R2 would have likely accompanied him on 90% of that journey to find this final temple, but that Luke may have intentionally deleted information from R2's memory to prevent him from knowing its exact location, and thus you have the final part of the map that's missing. That was provided in the end by Lor Santeca, who lived on Jakku, was a member of the Church of the Force, someone whom, according to, I guess, the new EU, had collaborated with Luke on trying to find the different artifacts and ancient teachings and records of the Jedi Order.
Yeah, but I still don't understand who left the map.
Well, the idea was likely that they had an idea in space of where Luke might be, where in the galaxy is Luke Skywalker. But they weren't certain where. And so they could have given that information to Lor Santeca, being that he was a knowledgeable individual, and said, well, Luke narrowed down the location of the first Jedi Temple to somewhere in this sector of space. Do you have any knowledge for us? And Lor Santeca could have then done his own independent research. He may have found the same sources that Luke Skywalker found that led Luke to the first Jedi Temple, and then transmitted. I do believe the events that catalyzed the beginning of The Force Awakens was that Lor Santeca had sent a message to Leia's resistance saying, I found where Luke is, send someone to me, I have a map for you. And the First Order intercepted this same message. And so at that point, it was a race to Lor Santeca to see who could get the map fragment first. And that's why everyone wanted to find the new R2 BB-8.
But you're theorizing about a lot of that.
Oh, yes, that's not... I don't believe that's lined out specifically in the movie. That's
you are trying to fix a plot hole.
Possibly, but I do know that a message had in the scroll in The Force Awakens. A message had been sent to the First Order, to the Resistance, that I do believe they had mentioned it in the scroll that they had found it. Let me look that up.
Yeah, I think they did. And that's why Poe is down there to meet Lor Santeca. I feel like it was a plot hole that Luke obviously didn't want to be found. The map led directly to Jakku. I mean, it was narrowed down to the actual planet. I mean, that was being the plot of the first film. I felt like that was yet another thing that just kind of got dropped and did not make sense to me. Not that it's even that important, but it was just the first of many things that I felt like got dropped or ignored from The Force Awakens.
The Force Awakens title scroll mentions that Leia sent her most daring pilot on a secret mission to Jakku, where an old ally has discovered a clue to Luke's whereabouts. But it doesn't mention anything about the First Order intercepting that or anything along that line. So yeah, that was my own interpretation of it.
Yeah, but that's what I feel like a lot of people are having to do with The Last Jedi is fill in these plot holes with their own explanations. And I feel like that is bad writing.
I don't necessarily know if it's in today's age you have this was a J.J. Abrams production. And as you know, Taurus, J.J. Abrams is very well known for his work on the television show Lost.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
You've heard?
I heard of it for 7 seasons when I continued watching, hoping that some answers were going to be given. And up until the 7th season, I said, okay, 7th season's when it's all going to go down. That's when we're going to find out all these mysteries. I made excuses up until the last episode. Everything from all 7 seasons is going to be explained in the finale. And then I got burned.
Sadly, J.J. Abrams is not a Brandon Sanderson.
No, he's not a closer, man. He's great at getting people's interest and drawing people in and getting people's investment, but he is not a closer from what I've seen. But I will say, Lost is the only... Lost in Star Trek. Star Trek I'm invested in, so I don't care who produces it. I'm going to watch it. But Lost is the only original J.J. Abrams production that I've really seen. I know he's developed several series, but Lost... Once Lost ended for me, I was done with him.
Porg, did you ever see any of Lost?
No, I saw part of like the first couple seasons, but then... at that point, I'm like, I'm too far behind. I'm too far lost, as you might say, to know what's going on. So I quit. So I did not get that wonderful J.J. Abrams experience that many did watching that series.
I personally didn't see it myself. My wife, Mrs. Aurelius, though, she watched it on Netflix, I want to say a year ago, and was heavily interested until the final season, in which case it seemed like many balls were just dropped. And she was left with a very unresolved feeling to the series.
I didn't realize she had watched it. I'll have to discuss her thoughts on it sometime. Yeah, it was grotesque in a way. I don't know a lot of people that were satisfied with that ending. In fact, I don't know that I've met. I've talked with a lot of people who have watched Lost, and they all felt extremely disappointed with that seventh season. But that is what it is. Regardless, JJ did get a lot of investment from people in The Force Awakens, despite people's complaints about it. People were still interested until Rian Johnson came along. What were you going to say, Draco?
Well, I was just going to say that when Lost came out, it was kind of the outbreak of a new form of media where it encouraged the audience to theorize along while you were watching to try to figure things out, because there were so many mysteries. It didn't just out and out give you the tell you what was going on at the end of the episode. You had to go through the end of an entire series to try to find an answer to a question. And as we learned in Lost, some questions are never answered, unfortunately.
Yeah, and that is a different kind of storytelling. I mean, and I get that. There's a lot of books where they end with some things unexplained, and I don't mind that. I mean, Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson left a couple things unexplained, and I think that's tasteful storytelling in certain situations. With Lost, that was a completely different type of scenario. Essentially, well, I don't want to really spoil the ending for anyone, but essentially, they pulled the "it's all a dream" kind of ending, where they're essentially all dead. So none of the series really had any relevance. But moving on, do we want to talk about the Snoke sequence, or we want to talk some more about Luke's first sequence?
I have a few more things about the first sequence on Octo.
Yeah.
You were introduced to the vermin of the island, who are known as Porg, some strange cross between a beaver and a penguin. And they are very prolific. Vermin, yes. Chewbacca cooks a couple of them up. And I imagine they would have been tasty if the vermin hadn't, made him feel guilty for being hungry.
I feel like the member of our panel who is named after these creatures is taking offense to the vermin terminology.
Well, I mean, there are many races which consider human to be vermin in certain sci-fi areas. So, speaking for a race that has been considered vermin in some franchises, being vermin's not necessarily a bad thing.
Do you accept that, Porg?
For the sake of argument, I will for now.
This may come to fisticuffs at a later location.
we might have a kerfuffle.
Kerfluffle, yes.
Just remember what a group of Porg is called. I'm just saying.
Oh, what is a group of Porg called?
A murder.
A murder of Porg. That sounds like a very strange graphic novel.
That also sounded like a veiled threat.
I don't know what you mean.
That's why it was veiled.
Indeed.
So on Octo, you have the ruins of a Jedi temple, or at least the ruins of a Jedi village near a Jedi temple. In fact, it seems the whole island is the Jedi temple. When Rey shows up, Luke is dressed in white Jedi robes. So it looks like he was expecting. So he must have seen the ship come down, a ship come down. If he saw a ship come down, he knows it's the Falcon. So I don't understand why he's in his hut, curious. You came on board the Falcon? Well, of course they came on board the Falcon. It's the only ship that's flown down out of your sky. He was wearing robes, so he expected somebody. Was he expecting her? Was he expecting Leia? Was he expecting Mara Jade? Nobody knows. But when he finds out who it is, they gave him his dad's old lightsaber, which surprisingly is not, telepathic, telekinetic, in giving him flashbacks. Toss it over his shoulder, goes back to his hut, shuts his hut, takes off his nice Jedi robes, which, he came to the planet to die, so obviously he's taking really good care of his Jedi robes for some reason. He's very important for him. But he changes into his black hobo outfit, and he stays in his hut until Chewbacca comes in and knocks down the door. Reminds us that, yeah, the Wookiee can rip your arm out of your socket if you make him angry. And that scene ends with Luke saying, "Wait, where's Han?" And then it moves on to Kylo Ren meeting with Snoke.
Yes, this is the first sequence where you see Snoke, and I was
In person.
In person, and I was very excited about this character. I'm a huge Andy Serkis fan, and so seeing Andy Serkis do another motion capture character is always cool for me. And I loved the character in The Force Awakens, and was really excited to see some backstory on him and some exposition. I felt like we didn't get it. Kylo gets a dressing down in this series. You're a boy in a mask. So you essentially see Kylo leave that sequence and smash his mask, which for me took away a lot from that character. But that's neither here nor there. But for me, Snoke really confuses me on the issue of the dark side Force user. In the first film, or in Episode VII, he says that it's about the balance of the light and the dark. They're not called Sith, but where is the light side that they're using? I mean, what do you guys think? Do you feel like Kylo Ren and Snoke are essentially Sith? Porg?
I think they want to hint that they are, but they don't ever come out and specifically say that. So it's a little confusing. And it may be just because that's, when we've had references to the dark side of the Force, it's always been in relation to the Sith. So it may be that, as a fan of the series, as a moviegoer that's seen the other movies, you just infer that they are Sith, even though they don't ever really reference that, or no one else ever really kind of references them as Sith. It's just they're, a darkness and evil that needs to be stopped. Because, they don't, call themselves Darth, which has always been something that, again, in reference to the Sith, there's always been, Darth Vader, Darth Sidious, Darth Bane. So, again, it's like, well, are they, aren't they? It's a little vague and confusing at times.
Draco?
I can't say that they are Sith, because Sith are an order that was diametrically opposed to the Jedi. They were the two sides of a coin. They were competing ideologies, you could say, that worked within the same framework, the idea that the Force has two sides. Whereas Snoke, he seems to have targeted the young Ben Solo, turned him into Kylo Ren. The idea being that only an individual who has a mix of both the light and dark, who is conflicted between the light and dark, is able to really pull down the power levels of a Darth Vader. And he mentions that he thought that Kylo Ren had the capacity to become the next Darth Vader, and then he basically lambastes him for not being Darth Vader.
Well, yeah, he says you got beaten by a girl who'd never held a lightsaber, which is true. I mean, given he was shot by Chewbacca's bowcaster in the shoulder, and I know that's been part of the excuse, but I mean, he did get beaten.
Well, Snoke calls him out Ben Solo, Kylo Ren, says, I killed Han Solo. And Snoke says, and look what it did to you. It shattered you in two. You were so distraught. You let this girl with no skill beat you. So basically, this is Snoke saying that Rey's not, quote unquote, that strong. It's just that Ben Solo let her win through ineptitude, being that he had just killed his dad. He was so emotionally distraught, and he needed a safe space. Instead, he got a girl with a lightsaber that kicked his ass.
Yeah. What were your guys' hopes for the character, Porg?
For which character?
Snoke.
I don't know if I really had what kind of expectations I had. I mean, I guess I was going to, again, working under the assumption that these were some sort of, Sith-like characters. I was figuring it would be, something along the lines of Sidious, oh, here's, this supposedly all-powerful evil master with, this young apprentice that he's trying to, subvert raise up into power or whatever. So I mean, I just figured some sort of Sidious like storyline. And so I mean, when you have later on in the movie what happens didn't necessarily really surprise me. I mean, it surprised me more that it happened within the movie. I figured it would be something that we would see in episode 9.
I agree. I figured he'd be taken down in 9, and I think Rian Johnson's reasoning for getting rid of him is to give Kylo Ren more room to be the villain. Although I think you could have had both of them. Draco, what are your thoughts on all this?
I expected more from Snoke, but we see the same trends that we saw in the opening scene continuing here. We have Kylo Ren walks in, and you have Snoke is congratulating him. Yes, truly, we have them on the end of a string. And when after Hux has left, Snoke goes, "You wonder why I keep such a rabid dog on a leash in such a position of power." And it makes it clear that Snoke has no respect for Hux in this scene, which is a big divergence from The Force Awakens. In The Force Awakens, Hux was a capable military commander, and he seemed to be the one that was in charge of all of the First Order's military decisions. He would keep Snoke updated, but Snoke was out of the day-to-day running. Snoke was more concerned, it seemed to us in The Force Awakens, with the people who were under his tutelage in the Force and with the spiritual matters of the Force. And that his lieutenant in that regard was Kylo Ren, who would carry out his actions. Here you have him putting down Hux, and then you have him calling out Ben Solo. I didn't expect him to necessarily be a Sith, but he definitely is carrying on the creepy, disfigured old guy with a absurd fascination with young men thing that Palpatine had.
Yeah, true.
So honestly, he's still manipulating Ben Solo, and in The Force Awakens, we were told, at least from Leia's perspective, it wasn't their fault that Ben Solo turned out as bad as it did. It was all the fault of Snoke. Snoke is the one that seduced their son to the dark side.
Yeah, and that's a good point. That Snoke in itself and Rey's parents, those kinds of things were a big deal because they made it a big deal. They made Rey's parentage a big deal in the first movie. They made Snoke a mysterious figure because, like you said, that reminded me that Leia had mentioned it was Snoke. Snoke converted Ben. Who is this guy? Was he a political figure? If you know that he is the one who seduced your son to the dark side, why were you letting him hang out with this dude? Like, was he a bad dude then? Was he a good guy that later pulled a Palpatine? That made me interested when Leia made that comment. I just didn't understand. And you never get that explanation. Maybe you'll get it in 9 as to why Snoke was hanging around Ben Solo in the first place. But
well, he lived up the street, obviously, and Ben Solo saw him when he was doing his space newspaper route, and
yeah,
so
that
he's
sounds
like,
familiar.
"So you want to come down into the basement?" And so that's
It's pretty good.
Got some of that spiked Tylenol PM, and everything went bad from there.
Yeah, that goes right downhill from that point. Do we want to talk any more about that sequence of Snoke, or do you want to go back to the next Luke?
Well, when Kylo is about to stand up to himself, stand up for himself. You have Snoke lashes out at him with Force lightning, but he doesn't lash out directly. He throws that Force lightning down at the floor, and it hits Kylo Ren and bounces him back across the room. And immediately, all of his guards are ready to fight, even though the boss has already smacked down the lieutenant. I see that as a little bit of a overreaction, personally. What do you guys think?
Porg.
I don't. I think it's just, reinforces that these are kind of like his henchmen, his his bodyguards or whatever. I mean, you see it in a lot of movies where someone might make a move towards the so-called leader, and he asserts his power over whatever the upstart may be, and then you always see these bodyguards, whatever, like take a step forward, like oh, who do you think you're messing with, kind of thing. So I mean, I didn't really question it. It was just interesting to see them in the scene, because again, it's a way for them to kind of put more similarity between him and Sidious, because when you see Sidious, he does have his guards around him too, which are also wearing red uniforms and carrying around some sort of pike weapon. So to me, it was another one of those ways for them to be like, well, is he a Sith Lord? Is he not a Sith Lord? What's going on here? And again, with the use of the Force lightning, it's again, which is something that we only normally see a Sith using.
Yeah, exactly. We saw Darth Tyrannus use it against Yoda and Anakin in Geonosis, and then you see Sidious using it. Now, obviously, Snoke is using it. I don't know. I think in that sequence, he's just letting Kylo know. I mean, I'm in power. I'm in control. You are my subordinate. This is complete and utter domination. So I didn't know that it was necessarily an overreaction, or maybe it was, but it was to show Kylo that, hey, I'm in charge here. You defer to me.
Well, it's not an overreaction if you're talking about the Sith, because the Sith apprentices are always trying to kill their masters. So at least that's what we've learned from different EU properties and from the new universe properties as well. Um, so if he's a Sith, it makes complete sense that Kylo Ren is going to try to challenge him and he's going to try to put him down right away. But again, he's proposing that there's supposed to be a balance. Is he just lying? Could he really be a Sith and he's just trying so hard to keep Kylo Ren off balance that he has lied about being a Sith, and that part of this lie is what's keeping Ben Solo in confusion, is that I'm going to stay strong with the dark side, but I'm going to keep you as conflicted as possible so you can't rise up against me.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It will all be explained in episode 9.
Sure. Before we move on back to Luke Skywalker, we are about 1 hour into our recording, and we are about 20 minutes into Star Wars: The Last Jedi. So we may end up having to split this into 2 separate videos.
Yeah, I'm already thinking that. we'll go until we need to stop, and we'll figure out where we are. But yeah, we're not very far into the film at all. We cut back to Octo, and this is the sequence where Luke is talking to Rey, and he says, "What did you expect? Me to just show up and take on the First Order with a laser sword?" What did you guys think? What was your reaction to him using the term laser sword? Porg?
It left me scratching my head a little bit. It's not something that they've necessarily really referenced a whole lot, being called laser swords. But I mean, in some ways, I understand Luke's argument. Do they honestly expect him to go back and face down the whole entire First Order by himself? But it's just kind of confusing because you still really don't know what Luke's doing there, what exactly is going on. So it's just still more things that have me scratching my head, and continues that sense of unease that I have about the franchise or the movie and where things are going.
I prefer the how it should have ended video to Luke's reaction. What do you expect me to go and take down the First Order with a laser sword? Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. Let's go do it. And then, of course, you get to see him actually do that. But the term laser sword really annoyed me, and I felt like it was an intentional poke at the hardcore fans by using the different terminology for a lightsaber. I felt like it was disrespectful personally that they used that term and had Luke say it that way. Draco, what were your thoughts?
I would agree. Now, that phrase has been used for to refer to a lightsaber before. The Jake Lloyd, who played the Anakin Skywalker of the Phantom Menace, used that line to refer to a Jedi's lightsaber as a laser sword. I don't know if that was meant to reference back to try to be a nod to the fandom towards the Phantom Menace, or like you said, if it might have been a dig towards the fandom. I think that could be left up to anyone to try to sort out.
But Jake Lloyd's character doesn't know anything about the Jedi really. He hears rumors and he thinks they're these cool heroes of the galaxy, but he's uneducated. Luke is at this point a Jedi Master. So I felt like it was the latter of your two. I don't feel like it was a nod. In fact, I'm not even sure Rian Johnson had watched the prequels. I felt like it was an intentional dig, and after seeing the movie, that just reinforced my opinion.
Well, that coming from a Jedi Master does definitely seem to be a very sarcastic and condescending comment.
Yeah, I agree. So, I mean, regardless, we see in the same sequence, I believe. This is the sequence where Rey follows him through his daily routine, and we see him milking the sea cow, which is also has been a kind of a controversial sequence. Porg, what was your thought of his routine and the sea cow and all that bit?
Oh, that was so gross. I don't understand what purpose that serves in the movie. Like, like, oh, I that was one of my, like, that was never a question I actually asked myself. Well, how is Luke surviving on this island? I mean, obviously he is, there's some means for him to survive. Otherwise he would be dead when she shows up. But I mean, I don't understand, I still don't understand what purpose that serves other than to just disgust the viewer, and just, that whole look, on Luke's face, and then the thing looks at Rey and she gets embarrassed. Like, what? I was like, okay, I think at that point I was like, I'm done. Like, I'm checking out. I'm no longer actively like really watching this movie. Now I'm just, kind of having an out of body experience.
Yeah. And like Draco said, you're only 20 something minutes, maybe 25 minutes into the film at this point, and like you said, you're already checked out. I was the same. I felt like they were intentionally running Luke through the mud. They were embarrassing him, making him drink this green milk. I thought it was just disrespectful. I don't know if Rian Johnson got beat up when he was a kid because he dressed up like Luke Skywalker and was like, I'm gonna grow up and destroy this character for me being hurt as a child. I don't know what happened, but it just felt to me like that whole sequence just made Luke look like a buffoon, and I didn't appreciate it, and I checked out at that point too, or before really, when he threw the lightsaber. Draco?
The most uncomfortable part of that scene is where he's actually milking. I think they call it a sea siren, but it's basically a sea cow, with very unfortunately shaped udders. It makes this noise every time. Every time he goes to milk it, and it's and the thing looks over at Rey, makes eye contact at Rey while he's doing this.
Yeah, that was bizarre.
So like it's sentient, like it's like, oh yeah, this dude's really drinking my milk right now. And Rey's like, I am so sorry, I did not know he was gonna come here to do that. I do not support this message. And then Luke, he looks up at Rey, and it's like like a drunk who has come up and his family says, we really love you. We wish you wouldn't drink so much. And he takes another drink just out of spite. And ooh, yeah, that hit the spot. That's the look on his face. It's like, yeah, this is what I am now. Drink it in like I'm drinking this nasty milk. And it's jarring, really.
It is jarring indeed. That sequence was just abominable.
And he goes on to fish in the least efficient way possible.
Yeah.
He pulls out a 30, 40 foot long stick with a spear on the end. And after he wedges the spear in between some sticks and uses it to jump across a chasm, why couldn't he just stand on his side of the chasm?
I've never understood that either. He gets this giant pole vault out and goes to the other side of the chasm and fishes over there. Was he just trying to show off?
Maybe Ray's scaring away the fish. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
But he picks up this 40-foot long spear and he looks down into the waves below that are covered in foam from everything's crashing against the cliff, and he spears a fish. Now, the spear tip didn't break when he pole vaults across, which is kind of odd. It must be a reinforced spear tip of some sort because he's got a bunch of reinforced metal on board that on the island. But so he stabs the fish with this 40-foot spear. Does he then pull the entire 40-foot spear up over the cliff to get the fish off the end?
It was conveniently cut. What do you think?
It was a big fish.
He would have had to. I mean, how else, like he says, how else do you get that fish up from that point?
Does he lift it up and like swing it over to Ray and say, "Hey, can you pull this fish off of this for me?"
I don't know, but by God, we're going to spend 20 minutes talking about this fish. Ray says to him later, "You've closed yourself off to the Force." So it's not like he force lifts the fish up.
And it's not like he could sense where the fish was through the Force.
Right. He wouldn't have been using the Force to fish at that point. He didn't force jump across the chasm. He used the pole vault. So yeah, how does he get this fish out of there? Does Ray help him?
I'm just surprised he could spear it to begin with. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that I scratched my head at that. I guess when I watched the movie, I just assumed he was somehow using the Force to sense the fish down there. It did seem, like you said, a super inefficient way to do his fishing. But yeah, I would just assume that somehow maybe he manages to lift the stick up and over to the other side and like drag it so the fish pops off. And then you'd have to put the stick back in the water, pole vault back across to the other side, and then he picks the fish up as he's heading back to his house.
I mean, it's like one of those
puzzles.
Lot
of work for a fish.
It's a lot of work for a guy who's come to this planet, to this island, to die.
Yeah, that is a weird statement. I came here to die, but I'm definitely trying to keep myself alive. If he is using the Force to sense the fish in there, then he's a damn hypocrite because he's using the Force when it suits him. Like, I need to get this fish, so I'll use the Force a little bit, but then I'm going to close myself back off.
I would have to believe, given that she said that he cut himself off from the Force, that he has. So he's not using it to fish. So, I mean, he's a pretty awesome fisherman for a guy that came from a desert planet.
And not to mention, she came from a desert planet too, so she's not at all offended by all the fog or the rain or anything going on Octo.
Well, she does seem later on. There is a scene where she does seem to be generally amused by all of the water and the rain, because there's that scene where she's underneath the Falcon, and right before her and Kylo have a Force call, she sticks her hand out underneath the running water that's coming off the Falcon and has like this smile on her face. So, I mean, I would assume that she, probably loves the fact that there's all this water around.
Yeah, you did have that sequence that you were talking about where she's kind of fascinated by the rain. But I would agree also that I don't think Luke was using the Force to catch that fish. I don't. I think he had some pulley system that we didn't see. He probably used a pulley to get it up. I don't think he accepted any help from Rey because he does this by himself. So I think she just watched. And if she offered some help, I think he would have refused it.
But then how did he install the pulley system, though?
I don't know.
With the help
I
of
don't know.
frog people.
We got it.
With the caretakers?
Yeah, maybe the caretakers built it for him. Maybe they thought, hey, we're going to help this guy out. He's here.
That may be why he's on the other side of the chasm. That's where the pulley system delivers the fish.
Yeah. Maybe they built it over there and he didn't want to say anything like, hey, guys, could you have just put it on the other side? He didn't want to be rude.
Maybe.
I mean, we got to get this figured out, guys. We cannot move on until we establish how he got that fish out of the cavern.
Well, we in a prior discussion, I think we spent a half hour discussing the possible plumbing and water system on board the Death Star. I figured that's why I wasn't a part of the New Hope conversation, because it would break down into why is there so much water in the garbage mashable? I mean, that's just inefficient.
It is. But let's go ahead and pull ourselves away. If we can come back, let's do a video. Let's do a whole video on the fish.
Oh, okay.
At a later time. Well, coming soon. How the hell does Luke get that fish out of the chasm? I think the next sequence goes back to the Resistance, where Poe gets a dressing down from Leia.
Well, before that, Luke, they go back to the village, and Rey gets a call from the Force, a summoning, and she goes, follows this intuition from the Force and follows it to this old ancient tree with a single bookshelf.
Yeah, she's got a strong relationship with the Force already. Stronger than we saw Luke have, stronger than even Anakin had. And so she goes in and she finds the books, and that's where Luke comes in and says, "Who are you?" And you get the, "I'm nobody." Well, where are you from? From nowhere. Nobody's from nowhere. I'm from Jakku. Okay, that's pretty much nowhere. You got that little bit. You got the laugh out of it, and then is that where he says he came to die? Is that the sequence?
Yes.
Yeah, that's where he says that it's time for the Jedi to die. But it wasn't until that point that he was even willing to consider her as any kind of Force aptitude, any possible candidate for training in the Force. This scene is in the movie what I guess you could say brings about Luke's curiosity, arouses his curiosity in Rey as a possible student and what her potential might be.
What were your guys' opinions on Luke's basically revealing to her that he came there to die? He doesn't think the Jedi should continue. Were you guys disappointed in that, Draco?
I wasn't certain what he meant in regards to that, because the Jedi being a negative influence on the galaxy was definitely the perspective of Anakin Skywalker. That's part of how Anakin was able to rationalize falling to the dark side, was that the Jedi Order had become so corrupt that they had been deemed as the arbiters of good and evil in the galaxy. They were the ones that kept governments legit. They were the ones that kept people from going corrupt. That I find it hard to see how that ideology skipped to Luke Skywalker when he basically exchanged 3 lines of dialogue with his dad before his dad died.
Yeah.
And then his dad becomes a Force ghost. Well, in theory, he's got time to talk with his dad, but ever since the attack on his school, he's cut himself off from the Force. He's cut himself off from Obi-Wan, from Yoda, and his dad.
Yeah, I was crushed by that whole bit. I mean, the trailer made it seem like there were going to be this gray Jedi sequence, and that's theorizing. I mean, that's on the fans and myself for extrapolating what we wanted to see from the trailer. But when he says basically, the Jedi were corrupt and they allowed Sidious to come to power and the Jedi Order needs to end, to hear those words come from Luke, and the last time we've seen Luke in the films, he's celebrating the downfall of the Empire and waving over to Hayden Christensen as a Force ghost. And so that really, really devastated me as a fan to hear Luke say those words. Porg?
I didn't assume necessarily, like, that sequence that necessarily, like, I guess I fell into the lines of some of the theory about, either like gray Jedi or some other version or, organization, if you want, of other than the Jedi. It's like, obviously, you have this history of Jedi falling to the dark side and becoming Sith Lords and causing all kinds of problems for the galaxy at large. So I guess I just kind of assumed that maybe he was going to go in a different direction. It's like, okay, we need to end the Jedi Order, and we're going to start, Luke's school of, friendly faces or something, and, kind of go off in a different direction. Not necessarily like, oh, there doesn't need to be any more, light side users in the galaxy.
Yeah, I was the same way. I thought he was going to change the rules of what the Jedi were, maybe call it something else, like you said. But I certainly didn't expect as another gotcha moment. But to hear Luke just say, "I'm out," was very disappointing. Draco?
What's further, the way Luke explains it is that from his point of view, the Jedi created the Sith. That not only did they allow the Sith to arise, but by merely existing, they caused the Sith to come into being. And that goes against everything that we know of from beforehand. The Sith have existed since long before the prequels. In fact, at the beginning of the prequels, the majority of the Jedi don't believe that there are any Sith anymore because they've been in hiding. The Law of Two book, which was one of the Darth Bane books, talks about how Darth Bane was the first of the Jedi to embrace the Law of Two. First of the Sith, that there should only ever be two Sith, a master and an apprentice. And then about a half dozen other people that you're leading on that they are possible apprentices, but they're not really apprentices. They're just wannabes.
Yeah, the rule of two has always confused me.
But you have Luke who decides that the Jedi must end. And in the trailer, that was again a shocking comment to say. He's the last Jedi, so the Jedi must come to an end. So the positive people were theorizing, well, then we're building something new. He is the last of what was, and what is going to be is not going to be a Jedi. It's not going to be so strictly adherent to the Jedi precepts, but perhaps there'll be something more along the line of a gray halfway type order that embraces those who are able to use the dark side and the light side to the positive enhancement of the universe. And that maybe that was going to be about it. The people who were glass half empty type said, well, yeah, Luke's decided that, he wants to die and that there will be no more and the Force will die with him, and which is just nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, even if it was like a volunteer fire department or something where you could have families and you didn't have to be celibate, you didn't have to be as involved. I don't know. I just assumed there was going to be something else, a different kind. So, yeah, that was certainly a shocker. Anything else from the sequence you guys want to talk about?
I'm good. Porg?
I'm good, yeah.
So then we see Poe Dameron get dressed down by Leia for not calling off the attack. He got a lot of people killed, heroes, which she says are dead heroes now. So what do you guys think about the Poe Dameron Leia scene? Draco?
Well, you have Luke who leaves the tree, and it kind of immediately rolls over to Leia, who is contemplating the state at which her resistance movement is now in and what their options are. She's got a really big window. They need curtains for that window. I wouldn't be able to sleep if you're passing through hyperspace with that big window with all the light flashing by.
That bother you?
That would bother me. And I imagine anyone who has epilepsy would just be, keeling over from that. So Leia comes in and demotes him with a slap. You could say she smacks him down literally. And she dresses him down because because in her eyes his only solution to any problem is to jump in an X-wing and blow it up. which, I mean, that's kind of the Han Solo approach to things. You jump in your ship and you outrun it, or you outfly it, or you shoot it down. You go around. I don't know. That's not a well thought out idea, but
Well, I think to an extent it is, because in the past that has worked. In the OT, that was what you did. You got in a ship and you went and blew things up. And I think this is yet another idealism that's written into the script, that this is a new era and we're not going to have this alpha male type mentality where you just go blowing everything up. I think it was a way to intentionally say that those kind of characters are stupid, and that's not going to be this new Star Wars. So if you like that kind of thing, fuck off. That's how I took that. Because they say in multiple times throughout the movie, you know, we don't need a flyboy right now once Holdo comes out. And then, you know, throughout the film, you get Hux, who Draco, you established in the first film, is a competent commander, and in this film he becomes the joke, you know, the goofy sidekick that continues to get beaten down. So they throw his character under the bus. Luke is a buffoon living on this island. Finn is inept. I mean, I think that's where it starts, where you start seeing these male characters get shut down continually, and that was where I started to see politics take a front seat to the story.
well, I can understand Leia demoting him for going directly against her orders. She is the leader. She is General Leia. She is general of the entire thing. It's her organization. And for him to directly oppose her orders is a marked departure from any side, any kind of order. Um, so I can see that she is justified in demoting him in that aspect. And but it's in exchange, he can feel that he did the right thing, but he needs to accept that, yeah, he disobeyed direct orders, so he's going to face that consequence. But one of the failings, I think, in this movie is that Poe Dameron doesn't feel bad at all for the people that were lost in destroying the dreadnought. He doesn't feel any sympathy for the people that were lost, who were under his command. Those people died because he decided to disobey orders. Now, in the ultimately, he should feel that he did the right thing, but he should feel conflict over it. What do you think?
Porg?
I don't understand. I mean, so I can understand her demoting him because, like Draco said, he not following the chain of command. I mean, this is a military organization. You know, you need to have that chain of command. You need to be able to know that your underlings, your officers are going to follow your orders. And I mean, obviously, you know, demoting him is a direct result of not following his orders. I did feel like he was a little callous towards the loss of life. I mean, he definitely seems to be victory at any cost type mentality. I don't understand why she had to slap him. That kind of confused me. That seemed very kind of out of character, out of place.
It was a very personal response. Like,
right.
You betrayed my trust.
And I think in some ways, though, too, Leia is looking at, we do have limited resources. We do only have so many, we have a finite number of personnel and ships. We don't necessarily need to go around, just throwing them away. But at the same time, it's like, how many, the Dreadnought seem to be kind of a big deal. I mean, it is a big ship. It's definitely something that you don't want the First Order to have running around. So, it's, trying to weigh, the cost versus the outcome. But I feel like, too, that, and you see it later in the movie, I feel like Leia may have been trying to groom Poe, to be kind of her replacement, and is trying to kind of, have him as her protege. So, she's trying to teach him that lesson, there is a human cost to every action that you make, but it doesn't seem like they do a very good job of conveying that. It just seems like, especially because, she says, well, you can't solve all your problems just jumping in an X-Wing and blowing things up. And literally the next minute, she's like, yeah, I need you to go jump in your X-Wing and go blow some stuff up. So it's like...
It undermines her explaining her whole
thing. It undermines the whole entire lesson you're trying to, I guess, teach him. But it's just like, I don't know. It just seemed like, it was like, they didn't know what was going on. It was like, I want to try and, have this lesson, but I don't know how to write it in here.
Was she more upset at the loss of life or the fact that they were still paying off those bombers?
Yeah, I don't know. It's bad writing, and I think that's a problem you run into when you hire somebody who's not extremely established. I think he'd written 2 movies. I mean, I know Looper had some traction, but it wasn't like a Jurassic Park or something. It wasn't a massive blockbuster. He was an inexperienced writer, and she let him write the entire thing by himself. In the past, that has not worked well with Star Wars movies. With the exception of A New Hope, there was somebody else working on the script. And the prequels, I don't know if George did those by himself or not. I think he did. I think he wrote and directed all those, and there were problems. But Empire, which is arguably the best of the series, you had Kasdan involved, you had other people looking at the script. Somebody did just say, hey, this might not work. What if we do this? Even if Rian Johnson were to take the lead on it and essentially write it, I think somebody else should have vetted the script. And I think that person should have been J.J. Abrams, who had at least an overarching plan. But these things, like Porg said, I mean, you try to give this message, hey, don't be a flyboy and blow stuff up. And then in the next sequence, hey, go blow stuff up, where you're undermining your own message. That's something that could have easily been caught by somebody who wasn't as attached to the script and could stand back. Sometimes an outside perspective is good to have because you get so close and you get so invested in a story that you may not see certain things. And I think that was a big mistake, letting Rian Johnson write the entire script by himself. Draco?
I would agree. The fact that she smacks him down after saying that there's a human cost and you can't fix everything just by blowing stuff up. Oh, wait, there's a problem. Go blow stuff up because that's all you really know what to do. It's like saying you should be considering the human cost in all of these actions, but at the same time go disregard more human cost because we have ideals, but we're willing to throw them out the window when our need arises.
Right, when it suits us.
Correct.
When it's convenient for us, yeah.
And you immediately move into where Finn says, hey, we really are in the middle of nowhere because they've arrived at a hyperspace in between worlds. Normally there's nothing there. There's no reason to ever go there. So in theory, it should be the last place that the First Order would ever go to look for them because there's nothing there. There's nothing to give them away. So it's kind of a good place to lick your wounds and recover from a battle that maybe didn't go 100% the way you wanted.
Yeah, and it really starts setting up another huge writing problem that I had with the entire movie. So it's because, they don't know that the First Order is tracking them through space. So there's no reason for them to jump to the middle of nowhere. You could have jumped right to the planet, to the base that you were planning on, going to apparently the whole entire time to get out your distress call. So it just seemed rather strange and odd to me that they jumped.
Well, were they intending to get to Crate? Or was it a matter of, oh, hey, we jumped here and there happens to be this rebel base over here?
I don't think Crate was their end-all destination. From what I gather, they were jumping into the middle of nowhere to find a quote-unquote safe spot, and they were waiting for Rey to return with Luke, and they were supposed to find them there because, because Leia is wearing a hyperspace beacon. that's supposed to guide Rey back to them. I don't know. Did they have a press conference set up on another planet where it's like, don't worry, everything's okay. We've got Luke Skywalker. He's going to help save us. Were they waiting for him to go do this?
I don't know. I felt like they did the first jump, and that's the only jump they do, right? Because they only have enough fuel for one more jump.
That,
Right.
So
that's what
they end up
said.
having the slowest chase sequence in the history of filmmaking once the First Order jumps there. And they say, okay, well, they're tracking us. We know they're tracking us. If we jump again, they're just going to follow us. So we might as well not do it. And so then you have the cascade effect of the chase sequence and whatnot. And then it just seemed very convenient to me that Crate just happens to be there, unless that was their end-all be-all goal and they were trying to go to Crate all along. But as Pork said, why wouldn't they just jump to Crate?
I think that the location where they're in the middle of nowhere, it kind of falls. The description kind of falls off if they're only 13 hours away from Crate. Then they're not really in the middle of nowhere. They're near Crate. Unless it's a reference to being in the middle of nowhere, there's no established civilization or planets nearby.
Well, but I mean, by the middle of nowhere, I mean, they, like you said, they still have 16 hours of fuel. I think is what they say when Rose and Finn leave. Every other time you see in any of the Star Wars movies, when you make the hyperspace jump, either you're going to literally the middle of nowhere to hide, to rendezvous, or you're right next to a planet, basically. And the fact that they jump and that they're only 13 hours, again, we don't necessarily know how fast they're going, but you would have to assume that within 13 hours, even if you're going at almost light speed, you're still fairly close to the Crate system. So you would have to assume that they have some idea that that's where they wanted to go. Why would you just jump to this, empty system that it's like, well, we know that this system's not occupied, but there just conveniently happens to be this old rebel base. It just, like I said, to me, it was just very convenient, very confusing. Why they jumped where they did. You're on the outskirts of a system, but you're not, in the vastness of space where someone would expect you to jump.
Well, if Crate was a rebel base and one that had gone undiscovered throughout the entire war, and one that had not been disclosed to the Imperial remnants at the end of the original war, then it would be, in theory, a somewhat safe place, kind of a fallback location. So if you have a hyperspace coordinate that's, a day's sublight travel outside of Crate, that would make an ideal middle of nowhere drop location to meet up with other people. If otherwise, it's an unremarkable location.
My brain is starting to just turn inside out.
Let's move on then. So you have Finn who asks, how's Rey supposed to find us? And Leia shows off her new bracelet. It's a cloaked binary beacon. How does Finn know what a cloaked binary beacon is?
How do any of us know what a cloaked binary beacon is?
Because he recognizes it from sight. I don't know if they use many cloaked binary beacons mopping the floor for the First Order. Maybe you need to have one to mop the floors for the First Order if you work on, Starkiller Base. I don't know. But he seems very, very knowledgeable about this.
Dude, he seems knowledgeable about everything. Apparently, he's been stationed on every super secret military base and has mopped every room and knows the inside outs of all these places. It got very convenient for me. If they start doing that in the next film, man, it's going to be really embarrassing. I felt like Finn's character got really, really overdone with the I used to mop the floors bit, but at this point, I'm just venting. I got to settle down on the rage.
Well, Finn asks, go ahead.
I was going to say, he seems to get a lot of sanitation duties. He worked on the trash compactor in the Star Killer base. He's mopping the floor in Star Destroyers. It's just like, how long do you have to put your time in as a janitor to get promoted to stormtrooper?
Yeah, it was extremely convenient. I know, Draco, you've railed against that as well. You wanna do a rant on this?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if I want to get onto that tangent. Everything's pretty much been said. I mean, uh, we have Finn, who one of his first missions as a stormtrooper is going to Jakku and with Kylo Ren to try to track down the the remnant of information to lead everyone to Luke Skywalker. And that's where he sees his first combat. Ostensibly, his buddy who's there gets shot, gets killed, and leaves a blood smear across Finn's face. And this is the moment that causes him to snap and question his loyalty to the First Order. We learned that they've been contemplating switching out the humans with clones. We learned that there are re-education centers where the stormtroopers who are acting out of line get sent to in order to brainwash them, indoctrinate them back to who they want to be. And The Force Awakens, Finn didn't have a name. It was FN number. And basically,
2187.
2187. It was Poe Dameron said, that's way too long. How about we call you Finn? And he's like, okay, sure, whatever. But having worked in the garbage mashable at Starkiller Base, having worked sanitation, having mopped floors, I honestly, I don't know. Maybe he's the clone. I guess I don't know. Maybe there was a different guy, and he mopped every floor in the in the First Order, and they cloned that guy, and they're just using them for custodial staff at this point. And maybe he's like their prototype to see what happens when you make one into a stormtrooper. That was just a joke. That's not a legitimate question.
I know. It's starting to once you get 2 hours into talking about this movie, it's like, I don't know. It's like this rage starts building up inside of me, and I just want to fight Ryan Johnson.
It gets difficult.
We may have to take a break just because of that, just to calm back down.
It may be. I mean, we are now about an hour and a half into this. In this scene where they bring up the cloaked binary beacon, Finn says basically to everyone, "Okay, so what are we doing now?" And they say, "Well, we need to find a new base that has enough power for us to call our buddies in, elsewhere." So like Porg said, we need to find a new base. It doesn't come up, well, maybe this place on Crate has enough power. That never gets discussed.
No.
And perhaps, I mean, I have my own personal theory as regards to Admiral Holdo and Rose Tico, and I'm going to be expounding on that theory in an upcoming video, the Spy Tico video. But it could be that knowledge of this hidden crate base may have been limited to only the intelligence staff of the rebel forces. I'm not certain if Leia was aware of the base when they jumped to that location. It may be that when she gets to that location, she's reaching out, trying to make her plans, and if, as my theory would suggest, Admiral Holdo is the head of the intelligence division, she would have made Leia aware of that.
Yeah, likely. Is this the sequence where they get attacked by the First Order?
Yes, this is where the First Order immediately jumps. As soon as they make the jump into the system, then the First Order has followed them.
Like, is this the sequence where Kylo comes after?
Yeah, this is as soon as they make the jump, then shortly thereafter is when the First Order has followed them in and begins their attack.
Yeah, so we get the sequence where she gets blown out into space here.
I believe so.
I think this is the scene. Regardless, it's during that sequence, even if it's cut in later. But when she gets blown out into space with Akbar and the rest of the senior staff on the bridge, so you get the sequence where Kylo senses his mother, she senses him. It's the scene from the trailer. Well, he chooses not to fire, but his cohorts behind him do fire. They blast the bridge. Everybody's sucked out into space. Akbar's gone with no fanfare. And then Leia, there's this beautiful shot of her out in space with her eyes closed, just floating there. Carrie Fisher died before this movie came out, so it would have been a great opportunity to do a recut, to edit this film to where this is a death sequence for Leia. But no, rather than do that, she opens her eyes, stretches her arm out like Mary Poppins, and flies back to the goddamn ship. And that sequence, I don't, even the people who like The Last Jedi that I've heard find that sequence ridiculous. Draco, what are your thoughts on the Leia Poppins?
I originally had some serious misgivings with that scene. I still have some misgivings with that scene. Um, Now, with Leia flying out into space, she would have all the velocity that everything in that cabin had as they ejected the ship. And it does originally show that she's spinning through space. The starscape around her is moving, so she is moving in a tumble. One of the first things she does when she activates her force powers is stop her spinning to where the stars stabilize, and then she drifts back in towards the building. Now, if you were a well-trained Jedi, I would accept that this would be a possibility. But here we have the unexpected ability from yet another, possibly another force-sensitive individual without any explanation of what their training is. The biggest problem I have with this scene is the fact that when she gets to the door, she's got her hand on the door, and when the door opens, it should suck everyone in that corridor out there with her, and then they'd all be boned. But instead, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say this is basic science fiction 101. I mean, this is stuff that the most basic principles of science fiction writers should understand. Go ahead.
Well, it's being consistent. They had the missile strike the bridge, and so there was explosive decompression. Everyone gets sucked out into space. But then 30 seconds later, you don't have explosive decompression. In fact, you have gases that shoot inwards from space. So you have space gas that comes from nowhere that smokes into the room as Leia falls into the corridor, and they say, "Oh, she's alive," and whatnot.
Porglord.
It's a really horrible. It is kind of bad writing, but if you go back and it's a very flimsy grasp, strand to grasp. If you watch the scene when she flies in, that where that doorway is, it almost looks like it's some sort of hatch, like there's a little compartment there. So she could have somehow maybe closed an outer door and then opened up the door into the rest of the ship. But I have problems with that whole scene too, because like Draco said, at this point in time, and even in in the EU, the new EU, Leia's never been trained with the Force. So, again, where did she gain this knowledge? Where did she gain this ability to do all of this stuff in the cold vacuum of space? It just really bothered me because, like, when did she learn this? How did she learn this? There has been instances in some of the old EU where, very powerful Jedi masters have been able to slow their breathing, or create, a small kind of pocket of air around them using the Force. But again, these are highly trained Jedi masters for the most part, not just kind of a random Force sensitive individual.
Well, I can understand the principle of, in real life, you have situations where mothers are able to lift cars to get their children out because of the adrenaline or whatever. So I could understand her using the Force as a survival mechanism. She's in peril. She just essentially has this explosion of force power, but you're still ignoring the laws of space. Like, she was out there for a really long time, and I mean, the Force can't make you just survive in space. Draco?
There are a few explanations in, I do believe, the Star Wars Clone Wars cartoon of a certain alien species which do have the ability to survive out in space so long as they have a breathing apparatus. But so far, humans are not one of those species. I do
Well,
believe it was Jedi Master Plo Koon.
yeah, you see Plo Koon go out for a little bit, but even he can't stay out for a long period of time.
Well, not forever, not in perpetuity.
No.
And certainly the clone troopers he had with him couldn't do that either. The air in their systems would run out.
Hmm.
So we have Leia, who's out, and it looks like she may be out for 2 or 3 minutes. She's spinning through space above the cruiser, floating away from the cruiser. She stabilizes herself, brings herself back in. You see, frost is actually gathering on board her skin, where her
Yeah.
skin is cooling. So there's not like a Jedi force field around her that's keeping her, separated from the harsh environment of the vacuum of space. So this is another very convenient use of inexplicable force power. This is, I would argue that this scene borders less on science fiction, more towards science fantasy.
Well, I mean, part of watching Star Wars is seeing force powers and new ways to use the force. And let's be creative about it. I get it, but man, this one just went way overboard for me.
Yeah.
I just go ahead.
I was like, it would have been different, if she would have used it, and then, when she regains consciousness, it's like, how'd you do that? Poe or somebody else there, was like, how were you able to do that? Like, they just all accept it, like, oh yeah, okay, cool. It would have been different if Poe would have been like, how in the hell did you do that? And she's like, oh well, I learned it from, it's such and such time or whatever. At least, give us like some sort of explanation on how or when she learned these powers, learn that ability, not just like everybody's like, oh yay, she's alive.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, with the advent of Netflix now having the Last Jedi available, I was able to go back and do a quick check on the whole space gas problem. And you were absolutely right. When it shows Leia is drifting into the ship, she is moving towards a orange hatch, a doorway that is open. And by the time she actually gets past that hatch and to the inside, to the closed door, it appears that the outer hatch has sealed and the intermediate passage has been flooded with oxygen. So the gases that we are seeing are part of the mass rush of gases that are aerating that area.
But I still had a problem with that scene. Like when I did see that again, and I realized that, like, if you look at like that whole entire bridge is just like utterly destroyed for the most part. There are a few kind of, the viewer that is showing Snoke's ship is, askew, and the screens are flickering or whatever, and there's all this fire damage. But when she gets to that hatch, pristine. Like there's no damage. Like it's not that. I mean, it's literally like feet from where she was sitting, and all this other damage. But there's no damage in there, and it still just kind of made me shake my head because like that bridge is gutted and there's all this damage, but like conveniently again, there's no damage to that part of the ship and the bridge.
Well, looking over the scene, the idea that that everything is damaged, everything is out of place, everything is knocked over, everything appears to be askew. But for the main part, the power in the bridge section is turned off. You see light shining out of that doorway because that's on a separate power circuit, which makes sense. Any emergency system is going to be on a separate power circuit from the adjacent systems. That way, if you do have an outer compartment blow out, your emergency passage back into a safe part of the ship is not compromised.
Well, I mean, it's not just the fact that it has power. I'm just talking about how that one spot was not damaged. There was no fire damage. There just, I don't know, it did bother me a little bit. It was just too convenient.
I do believe the fire damage was mostly contained to the outer surface of the ship. The interior damage was due to the explosive decompression of pulling everything out of the ship and away from the walls. But in that passageway, there's nothing to pull away from the wall.
Right.
So,
Anything else about the scene you guys want to go over before we move on?
I've got nothing else.
Other than now that every time I watch that, I just think of Yondo and Guardians of the Galaxies. Oh, Mary Poppins, bitches.
I had 5 pages of notes on this film. That completed my first page.
Wow.
That's 20% through the notes. The
Well,
next scene.
we are now 33 minutes into the film and an hour and 45 minutes into our recording.
Screw Mahler. Man, I think, what did he have? 5.5 hours on his review?
Yes, I think so.
We're coming after you, Mahler. We're going to double it. 11 hours.
I hope we're not doubling this. I have other things I want to not be stressing out about.
Let's talk real quick about the next Octo sequence I have here. That this is when Luke goes down and checks out the Millennium Falcon, and this is when the dice are kind of shoved down our throat. So the dice first appeared in A New Hope, from what I can tell, and they're shown briefly. You can see them, but they are not in Empire and Return of the Jedi, as far as I can tell. Porglord, can you confirm that?
I actually have no idea. I don't even recall really seeing them in New Hope until after someone had pointed that out.
Yeah, I didn't remember the dice at all. I had to look it up, and that's what I had found. The dice weren't a thing, is kind of the point I'm making. Like there was never a thing with these dice in the OT, and so now Luke goes into the Millennium Falcon. He turns the lights on, and he goes up there and he grabs those dice, and like, this is what the Millennium Falcon means to me. This is like the heart of the Falcon kind of a scene, and you're like, what? Where the hell did these dice come from? You know, these weren't a thing before. And of course, later on, he brings those dice. Those dice come up again. We'll talk about that roughly around hour number 10, maybe 10 and a half. But regardless, the dice sequence kind of bothered me because these dice have never been a thing before, and now all of a sudden there are these dice that play a major role later. And let me ask.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask Porg if those dice play a big role in the Solo film, right?
They are in there, yes.
Yeah. Go ahead, Draco.
I was going to say, this does seem to be a very contrived scene. The dice have never been any big. They've never had any major symbolic value for us before this film. But immediately after taking these dice, taking this memento, he goes into the lounge near the chess table and he finds R2, which is actually one of the better scenes in the entire movie.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm.
Because R2 comes out over and basically asks him, what the hell have you been doing? And Luke's like, no, I can't go. Nothing will make me go. And then you hear the original hologram, help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope. And he's like, that's dirty.
Yeah. That was a really good sequence. One of the very few in the movie that I liked. And that moment between Luke and R2, I mean, R2 is by this point, you know, such an icon to the Skywalker family, to have that moment and for him to show the original sequence that got Luke involved. I mean, that was the recording that took Luke out of his moisture farm and into the galaxy. So, I mean, the symbolic value of that recording being shown again had a lot of weight for me. And the fact that R2 kind of used it to manipulate him into action, I thought was a very tastefully done sequence. What do you think, Porg?
I definitely enjoyed the scene. I mean, it definitely, you know, it's like the Luke of, you get to see kind of the Luke of old. You know, up to this point, you know, he's just kind of been this grumpy old man, you know, get off my lawn, leave me alone. And, you know, you get to kind of see that Luke of old, you know, he's in the Falcon, you know, and he's, you know, you have to have a feeling that he's reminiscing, you know, all the memories that he's had aboard that ship. And I think that's kind of what, the dice are supposed to help represent too, is this tie to the past. It's kind of hard to fathom, the Falcon itself is that, but it's a large, it's a freighter. It's too big to hold in your hand per se. So, you have, I think they use the dice maybe in that way as that substitute. He gets to hold that piece of the past in his hand, and remember all of the, the times that he's, all those memories he has that are associated with, the Falcon and Han and Chewie and Leia. And then, he gets to sit down in the lounge and you see R2 light up and roll over, and you get to see that exchange between them. And, you kind of see that light-hearted Luke kind of come back, he's like, I couldn't take you. I'm not going to leave the island. Hey, sacred island, watch the language. So, to me, it's like, this is the Luke of old. This is the Luke that we've seen in the old EU. You get kind of that visual representation of it. And then, you get the R2 with the Leia playback, and, it's another way to try and tie the OT into this and kind of bring that old Luke to the forefront. So it is definitely one of the better scenes in the movie, in my opinion.
I agree in that you see the Luke of old for a little bit, and that almost makes the rest of the movie that much harder to bear, because you do see him for a brief second. It's like the Luke from A New Hope for just a brief second there.
And I was going to say, well, and it kind of, like, going back and rewatching it, like, it almost makes me think that maybe the Luke that we had seen, he's trying to pull off some sort of Yoda-like deception with Rey, because when we talked about this in an earlier video about the first time you see Yoda, you think he's kind of this crazy old hermit. Luke's there to see this powerful Jedi, and you run across this crazy Yoda, and Luke doesn't believe it. So it almost makes me hope that maybe that's what Luke was trying to do. Like, when he first comes across Rey, he's like, he's kind of trying to size her up and judge her, and he's going to try and pull off this, like I said, kind of crazy hermit act to see how she's going to react to that. But it's just like, I don't quite buy it.
Yeah, I don't think that's the case, although that is an interesting take on things. Draco?
Well, I would agree with you guys. The Luke you see in this scene is the Luke Skywalker everyone was expecting to see since the Return of the Jedi. I would argue he's not the Luke Skywalker of A New Hope. The Luke Skywalker of A New Hope was kind of whiny. He wasn't very wise in the way of the world. The Luke that we've seen in The Last Jedi up until now is nothing but world wise. There's no hope. There's no goals. There's no idealism left in him. He has become jaded with existence. He's become jaded with the fight. This character whom, his special ability was believing in the unbelievable, believing in the redemption of the unredeemable. He doesn't even believe in his own redemption at this point. He thinks that the Jedi have to die.
Yeah.
And so here, go ahead.
Well, no, go ahead. Finish.
I was just going to say, here you have R2. He's on the Falcon. He's feeling this nostalgia. I don't really appreciate the fact how he steals the dice from the Falcon, where the dice probably should have stayed on the Falcon as they were Han's dice, because now Chewie no longer has that memento to remember Han, and Chewie knew Han a lot longer than Luke did.
Yeah, that was kind of selfish.
So Luke steals this dice because it means so much to him, and then he's talking with R2, and you kind of R2 goes on the attack. R2 is alpha robot here. He's like, how dare you leave me behind with all those people? How dare you not bring me on this adventure? Why, come back? And Luke's saying, no, I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go. Nothing can make me go. And really, not even this. So you definitely get a different sense of R2 in this scene. R2 is not the, okay, let's go along. It's the, what the hell is wrong with you that you left me behind? Why won't you come back?
And that's the sequence that eventually persuades Luke to start training Rey. Because I think in the next scene is when he wakes her up and he says 3 lessons. We start at dawn. Isn't that when that happens?
I do believe so.
Yeah. So
Yes.
it is R2 that causes Luke to say, okay, maybe I will start giving her some basic training, and then we cut back to the Resistance. Do you guys want to talk any more about Octo, or are you ready to move on?
I did not appreciate Chewie cooking those porgs over the fire. That's what distracts Chewie and allows Luke to kind of sneak onto the Falcon unnoticed.
With the dice?
Yeah. And again, it's one of those things like, I don't understand why you have to have it in there. Like,
what?
The whole Chewie with, trying to eat the porgs over the fire, you have this 3 or 4 minute sequence, with them all looking, sad, with his big sad eyes at him and him kind of roaring and scaring them off. What purpose does that serve?
They were cute.
I know they were cute, but
you're the Lord of Porgs, and you don't appreciate this scene?
No, it serves no function.
He doesn't appreciate the fact that porgs are being roasted over an open fire.
Porg brutality is not a joke.
No, but
Porg lives matter.
Porg lives matter.
Wookiee starvation, I argue, is not a joke.
There was fish that he could have gone and eaten.
Okay, let's talk about this. How would he have gotten the fish out of the water?
There's a 40-foot pole and apparently an intricate pulley system just right down the road that he could have used.
Next Legacy Guard video. If Chewie were to switch to fish from pork, how would he get the fish out of the water? We'll be talking about this next week. I thought the sequence was funny. I didn't really progress the story any, but I thought it was a funny sequence. It's one of the few humorous moments that actually did land with me. Although I did like the how it should have ended video where Chewie gives the porg a piece of pork meat.
Well, chicken eat chicken. So why wouldn't porg eat porg?
I did get a kick out of when I had a potbelly pig. I did get a kick out of feeding it sausage and ham. I don't know what's wrong with me, but I always just used to do that and laugh.
Anyhow, I would say that one of the things that this does bring up is the porg are all flocked around Chewbacca, and they're looking up at him with these big, soulful eyes. And so the idea is they're sad that he's about to eat a porg. But I own dogs, and a dog that looks at me as I'm eating, the dog wants some of the food. So I don't know. I think how it should have ended may have been actually closer to the mark. They may have actually been begging for a morsel, but they definitely played it off in the movie as more so that they were sad that Chewie was eating one of them, which would imply that, like the sea siren cow, that they are also sentient and they realize that one of their own is being eaten.
Anything else on this scene?
Not from me.
No.
You okay there, Porg?
That just amuses me listening to you guys talk about it sometimes. But moving on.
I'm glad we can entertain you.
Hopefully we entertain the viewers as well. All 3 of them.
Well, you talking about the 3 of us?
Maybe.
So we go back to the Resistance, and this is where Holdo shows up for the first time. I was really disappointed that Akbar went out the way he did. I think as a writer, it would have held a lot of resonance if Akbar had played the Holdo role. Then he would have had some kind of purpose in this series. So him going out the window like that, and then having Holdo take command was bothersome to me. She shows up with definitely not in military uniform, although she's a vice admiral.
Correct.
Is that her rank? We don't know who she is. She's not established. I know they've written some EU books to try and retcon her back into the history, but it's not somebody we know. This is yet another attempt to either subvert expectations or slap the OT in the face. I thought Akbar should have had a bigger role in this film, and Holdo did not work for me as a character. Porglord?
Well, Akbar was one of the characters from the old EU that I did enjoy. So yeah, I was a little jaded towards the scene because, like you said, they literally just throw his character out the window. And like I said, is a vice admiral. She's in no sort of military uniform, even though everybody else that you see in the Resistance, other than Leia, is in a military uniform. And it's explained that Leia's not because she's in mourning for Han. And then, I mean, I think you can kind of give her a little bit of a pass too, because she was, she's the princess, even though she wants to be called the general. And we don't, like I said, we don't know anything about Holdo. So the fact that she wasn't in a military uniform or even something that looked remotely like one was a little confusing. And they kind of give the impression like we should know who she is because they're talking. She gives her speech there, and then Poe leans over to Elo Nasty and says, "That's the vice admiral of the battle of, I can't remember what it is, something Gulf." So it's like, well, maybe we should know who she is, and and he's like, well, that's not what I expected. So it was just kind of confusing.
Yeah, Draco.
I would agree. When the officer is explaining, which this is an officer who happened to not be on the bridge when the bridge blew out, that the chain of command was clear. The camera was focused on Poe Dameron, and he gets this. His eyes start to widen, like he thinks maybe he's gonna get in charge. They're gonna say, "Well, the fleet commander should be in command now. We're in a combat situation." But as soon as they announce Vice Admiral Holdo, he kind of sinks down like, oh no, I thought it was going to be me, but it's this other person who I'm not really familiar with. Listens to
as
her.
Small as the Resistance is, though, I mean, there's not a lot of these folks involved. Don't you think Poe would know a little bit more about Holdo?
He should. He should, unless information about Holdo is deliberately kept secret, which also plays into my Spy Tico theory that she may be actually the head of the rebel intelligence. In that case, she's not going to be really highly known to people. You don't want the leader of the spies in your organization to be someone that's well known to anyone in the organization, because then the enemy spies will know who she is and try to take her out.
And you know how you could have fixed that? One line. Why don't we know who she is? Oh, she's from the intelligence agency.
That would have fixed it, but again, we didn't write this, and they may not have had time to write this. They may not have time to put that line in there because they had to go to Cantabite. But so Vice Admiral Holdo is known from the Battle of the Chiron Belt. So there's some rumors about her, but for Poe Dameron, who is Leia's top, one of her top people, let's see, what was the line? And of course, it's one of her top people, most trusted individuals to go on this mission to get the map. He doesn't know who she is, so she must be kept on a very strict need to know basis. Her only action that's publicly known of would be the Battle of the Chiron Belt. So we don't know whether or not that battle went well for us or poorly for us, but I would assume it went okay. He immediately goes to her and wants to know what the plan is. And she absolutely will not tell him what the plan is, and basically brings up the fact that, well, you were just demoted, so you don't need to know the plan, which, if you think about it, if you look outside of the box, all the fighters have been destroyed. He's the leader of the fighter squadrons. He's kind of been benched by the fact that they have no fighters left. Now, later on in the movie, you do see shuttles from the other ships transporting people and supplies from those ships to the Radis, but and you do see ships eventually leave the Radis. So the shuttle bay has been repaired or isn't intact, or perhaps there's only one shuttle bay that has combat aircraft and the other one is a civilian shuttle bay. I don't have that information.
Well, did you feel like she was painted as a villain when she was introduced?
She was definitely painted as an outsider.
I felt like she was set up as a villain, like Ryan Johnson kind of made you distrust this character and felt like she was possibly working with the First Order or something like that, to set up another gotcha moment later. What do you think, Porg?
I definitely think they set it up to, to give you the impression that you shouldn't trust her. I mean, because like you said, Poe's a character. He's one of the main characters that we've seen, and he's like, so what's the plan? And she's like, oh, you don't need to know. And it's like, well, yeah, we kind of need to know what the plan is. We need to know what to expect. And the fact that she won't share that information with Poe is very, leaves me highly suspect of her. It's like, well, maybe she doesn't know, it's like, does she not have a plan? She doesn't know what they're going to do. And if she does, then why does she not trust Poe? What's going on here? So it's either she's inept because she doesn't have a plan and doesn't want to share it, or she's just someone we're not kind of supposed to like because she won't share the plan with one of our, our new heroes in this saga. So it's like, which one is it?
Well, and that's another huge plot hole, in my opinion, is that she won't tell Poe the plan, which causes the entire Canto Bight sequence, which essentially goes nowhere. And this is where Finn is trying to escape. I believe is the next sequence when we see him going down to the escape pods. Is that right?
Yes, I think
Correct.
I think it is.
Correct.
So he goes down there. He's going to the escape pod. He wants to find Rey and keep her away from the situation. And of course, he runs into everyone's favorite character, Rose Tico. So this is
everyone's most misunderstood character, I'll argue, but that's another video.
Yes, it is. Well, I look forward to this video with great interest. So this is where he meets Tico, and of course she finds out who he is, and she's like, "Oh, you're the Resistance hero, Finn." So is this not like a day after or within a week of Starkiller Base? Like, what's the timeline here? I know Luke's sequence is immediately following, so I would assume that this is within a day of the Starkiller battle.
I would assume that there is at least probably half a day of time between the actual destruction of Starkiller Base and the beginning of The Last Jedi, because you have all the forces that are fleeing the destruction of Starkiller Base, and suddenly they've regrouped, and at least I do believe it was 3 or 4 Star Destroyers along with the Dreadnought that appeared at the Rebel base.
Let's wrap up this scene and then let's break the video. I've got about 5% battery left on this iPad, and I did not bring a cord with me.
Sure.
Or I can bail and you guys can keep going, whichever you prefer. But so he meets Rose Tico, and she essentially says you're this great hero. Like I just don't understand how she knows he's this big hero. They're on the run. This happened, just a day or two before, where he does some heroic things, and she all of a sudden knows who he is, like a celebrity. Porg, what did you think about that?
I kind of questioned it too. I think a little bit more time has passed than just maybe 3 or 4 days. Definitely not a whole lot of time, but yeah, it's like, oh yeah, you're the big hero of the that came over. It's like, you guys just met him. And, it's like all of a sudden, it's like we don't even know who Holdo is. People don't even really know who she is, but this lowly technician knows who Finn is. So it was a little weird. Like, like I said, it's like, how does she know who he is and what he looks like? I mean, did they send out some sort of broadcast to everybody? It's like, oh, here's this stormtrooper that defected over, but we're not going to have any images of a vice admiral.
Or maybe she just has more to do with gathering information than anyone knows than maintenance. So, as you guys know, this leads into my Spy Tico video, which I will be getting into soon.
And I will agree. I mean, your theory does work very well and helps fix a lot of the the problems in the story. But again, that's yet another reason why I think there should have been another writer involved with this script. Just basic things like that. She eventually tases Finn because she knows he's going to escape. He wakes up, and then they come up with a plan. They realize they're being tracked at that point, right?
Yes, this lowly technician and our janitor stormtrooper, literally within 5 minutes of meeting each other, are able to figure out how to disable the hyperspace tracking.
Yeah. What the hell?
Well, we had hyperspace tracking. We had the example from A New Hope when the Millennium Falcon leaves. There is a beacon that's been planted on board the Falcon. Leia's aware of it immediately, and she even says, "Yeah, that was a light TIE fighter escort. We got off easy." And Han and Luke are, "Easy? What are you talking about?" She says, "Clearly, we've got a beacon on us. They're going to track us back to our base." So in the movie, Leia never suggests that there's a new tracking technology. She just says they've tracked us through hyperspace. I just reviewed it. Rose Tico is the one that suggests active tracking. She's the one that suggests that it must be like any other form of tracking, and that there must be a responder on their ships. It's all very odd.
Well, go ahead, Porg.
I was going to say, well, if there's a tracker, then why would they not try to find the tracker as opposed to this, hugely elaborate scheme to get onto the other ship to disable the tracker on that end?
Well, the idea behind the active tracking is that they have a technology that allows you to follow a ship through hyperspace. Whereas if it's
so you're following a scent almost.
Correct. Okay. Instead of following a beacon. Now, my Spy Tico video implicates that there is a beacon on board, one or more of the rebel ships, and that's what they're actually following. And that this case, Rose Tico is leading them on a red herring chase.
Well, they take their plan and their idea to Poe, or they tell him their theory and whatnot. And at this point, they contact Maz Kanata. What did you guys think about the Maz Kanata cameo?
She's there's a dispute going on, a union dispute that she's trying to resolve with a blaster.
Yes,
that's a peaceful activity.
Well, forceful negotiations. It was, I guess it was kind of nice to have the callback to her character, but it was very confusing that, why is she, it's like, why is she in this, situation, with this dispute or whatever. And it's been, well, then, that gives her the out that she can't help him. Well, it's like, she doesn't have to be in a dispute. You could just simply say, well, I can't help you, but you can go find this other guy. I would buy that just as easily as her having to be in this weird, union dispute that we know nothing about, and it's very confusing on what she's doing.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I was just gonna say I wasn't bothered by the scene itself until she starts telling them about the person that they need to find, the code breaker. And did you guys get the sexual reference she made about the code breaker?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
he's good with his hands.
Yeah, that's made me extremely uncomfortable because I got a visual of Maz Kanata. Yeah, so you can follow that where it goes. That made me uncomfortable. But the scene itself, I didn't mind. I didn't mind the callback or the situation. I thought it was cool to have her in the movie. What do you think, Draco?
I minded it. Who of that group knows Maz Kanata? As far as we know, she was an independent force. She had a special tie to Han Solo and Chewbacca, but she didn't know, as far as we're aware, she didn't know Poe Dameron. She knew Finn, but she had recognized Finn was a coward, and she told him where he could go if he wanted to continue running away. So she has zero respect for Finn, and she has no idea who in the world Rose Tico is. What does or C-3PO? Did C-3PO arrange this? He was there. So why call Maz Kanata? Why is she your first go-to?
Well, I think it was just a convenience in the script. Hey, let's bring this character back. I mean, there didn't really serve much of a purpose other than her telling them. Well, I mean, it did serve a purpose on her sending them on the goose chase to Canto Bight.
They could have drawn a name out of a hat and gone, well, maybe we'll find someone on Canto Bight. I don't know. They could have said, well, a lot of the weapons designers that facilitate both Rebel and Imperial tech are located on Canto Bight. Why don't we go there? Why do you have to bring in Maz Kanata? There's no story purpose to go to Maz Kanata.
It gives them the excuse. It's a flimsy pretext to give them the excuse to go to Canto Bight.
Indeed, the story.
Yeah, it was a shoehorned way to get them off to Canto Bight. Again, like I said, I didn't have a huge problem with the scene itself, but the Canto Bight sequence, we'll get into that probably in the next video. But I did have a problem with Poe Dameron asking. So Finn and Rose Tico come in there, and he asks at one point, "How did you two meet?" Like, who the hell cares? What is that? What is that question? If somebody comes up to me, a couple, a male and a female, and they're asking me a couple of questions, like, why is the first question, "How did you two meet?" Draco, did that bother you? That question?
It seemed a little odd. And with my Spy-Tico theory, it seems to me that perhaps Poe Dameron may have not been completely certain about Rose Tico's responses. He also may not have been certain about Finn's responses. If he knew Rose Tico was stationed at the escape pods, then maybe he knows Finn is trying to run away again, because Finn was trying to run away every time up until now. So it's difficult to say what the motivations were in that regard. However, I know you've got to be like on fumes on your battery, Taurus. Should we wrap this up?
Yeah, I'm looking at I'm actually at 4%, so we can wrap it up at a normal pace.
Okay.
But what did you think, Porglord, about that question? Like, how'd you two meet? Did you feel like that was awkward at all?
It did seem a little out of place. I mean, the only thing I could really think of is like Draco said, it's like he knew where she was, stationed, and maybe what she was supposed to be doing. And so it kind of gives them an opportunity to like build trust with each other, because Rose has the opportunity to kind of rat Finn out and say, oh well, I tased him, trying to jump into an escape pod, but instead, she's just like, oh, it's luck. So it's kind of like I said, it's a way to for them to build trust with each other. Though again, it's just kind of weird, and I didn't know. It's like, what purpose does that really serve? But
was it good luck or bad luck?
I would say bad luck, because you get the whole Canto Bight scene.
Yeah, I'd say bad luck indeed. Anything else on this sequence, Draco?
I don't have anything else on this sequence. I still stand by the fact that that Rose bringing up the active tracking technological advancement is really what led us to Canto Bight, because they figure out to themselves what must be required for this, and because Finn has mopped every floor in the known galaxy, he's like, oh yeah, I know that room. I've been in that room and mopped that floor. And then they go to Maz Kanata and say, well, we need to get into this room to do this thing. And she says, well, you need this special guy who's really good with his fingers. So,
ick.
So really, if we hadn't had it's all an issue of writing and plotting. And there is a theory which explains a lot of the irrationalities behind these leaps in logic. And our viewers can look forward to hearing that in the next couple weeks.
So the next scene is back on Octo, and we'll get to that in the next one, unless you guys want to keep going. But I'm going to drop out. I apologize for not bringing the charger with me. So we'll start out with that next time, or you guys can keep going, whichever.
I think we should probably pause for now. What do you think, Porglord?
Yeah, I think that'll be good.
Okay.
All right. We've
Well,
made it
thanks.
45 minutes into The Last Jedi. Our video is now 2 hours, 15 minutes long. And so we'll pick up from this point next time.
And I am at 30% through my notes.
Wonderful. All right. Well, to all of our viewers, thank you for stopping in for part 1 of Why We Hated The Last Jedi, episode 8 of the sequel of the saga. So remember, everyone, be kind.
Live long and prosper.
And may the Force be with you.